The diplomatic vessel Times Harmony's Edge Times drifted silently through the void between stars, carrying the most important cargo in human history. Ambassador Sarah Chen stood at the observation deck, watching the massive alien dreadnought grow larger in the viewport. The Zephyrian Empire's flagship Times, Scales of Vengeance Times, stretched for kilometers, its hull gleaming like polished obsidian under the distant starlight. "Mommy, are we there yet?" The small voice broke through Sarah's concentration. She turned to see her 6-year-old son, Tommy, pressed against the reinforced glass, his breath fogging the surface as he stared in wonder at the alien ship. "Almost, sweetheart," Sarah replied, kneeling beside him. She had fought against bringing Tommy on this mission, but her husband's deployment to the Outer Rim colonies had left her with no choice. The Zephyrian First Contact protocols demanded the presence of Earth's chief xenobiologist, and that was her. Captain Morrison's voice crackled over the intercom. "Ambassador Chen, we're receiving docking clearance. The Zephyrians are requesting you proceed directly to their council chamber upon arrival." Sarah's stomach tightened. 3 months of preparation, countless simulations, and still she felt woefully unprepared for what lay ahead. The Zephyrian Empire controlled half the galaxy, their military might legendary among the stars. Humanity had stumbled into their territory quite by accident when the colony ship Times New Horizon Times had suffered a navigation error. The Zephyrians could have simply destroyed the human vessel, as they had done to dozens of other species who had wandered into their space uninvited. Instead, they had issued an ultimatum: send a representative to explain why humanity deserved to exist. Sarah was that representative. Dr. Chen called her assistant, Marcus, approaching with a tablet in hand. "I've compiled the final behavioral analysis of Zephyrian social hierarchies. Their entire culture revolves around displays of strength and dominance. Any sign of weakness or submission will likely result in immediate termination of negotiations." Tommy looked up at his mother with wide blue eyes. "What's termination mean?" "Nothing you need to worry about, buddy," Sarah said quickly, though her heart raced. The Zephyrians were descended from apex predators, their society built on the principle that might made right. They respected only those who could demonstrate power, and humanity's small fleet of exploration vessels hardly qualified. The docking procedure took 47 minutes. Sarah had counted every one of them, her anxiety mounting with each passing moment. When the airlocks finally sealed and the atmospheric readings showed green, she took Tommy's hand and made her way to the exit. The transition between ships was surreal. The human vessel's clean, sterile corridors gave way to something that looked more like the inside of a cave. The Zephyrian ship's walls were carved from what appeared to be living rock, with veins of bioluminescent material providing dim, amber lighting. The air was thick and humid, carrying scents of sulfur and ozone. "This place smells funny," Tommy whispered, clutching his mother's hand tighter. Their Zephyrian escort was a being that stood nearly 3 meters tall, its reptilian features sharp and predatory. Scales the color of burnished copper covered its elongated head, and its eyes glowed with an inner fire. When it spoke, its voice was a low rumble that seemed to emanate from somewhere deep in its chest. "I am Warrior Captain Vex Thul. You will follow. You will not speak unless spoken to. You will show proper respect to the High Command." Sarah nodded, not trusting her voice. She had practiced Zephyrian etiquette for months, but being in the actual presence of one of these beings was overwhelming. The captain moved with fluid grace despite its size, leading them through corridors that seemed to pulse with organic life. They passed other Zephyrians along the way, each one pausing to stare at the humans with undisguised curiosity. Some displayed obvious hostility, their scales shifting to darker hues and their tails lashing behind them. Others seemed merely intrigued by these small, soft creatures that had somehow found their way into Zephyrian space. "Mommy," Tommy whispered. "They look like dragons." Sarah squeezed his hand in warning, but Captain Vexthul's hearing was apparently excellent. The alien stopped and turned, its burning gaze focusing on the small boy. "Dragon?" it said, the word awkward in its mouth. "Explain this term." Sarah's throat went dry. This was exactly the kind of interaction she had hoped to avoid. "It's just a word from our mythology," she began carefully. "Creatures of great power and wisdom. I was not addressing you, soft skin." Vex Thull cut her off. Its attention remained fixed on Tommy. "The small one will answer." Tommy looked up at the towering alien without a trace of fear. "Dragons are really cool. They're big and strong, and they can fly and breathe fire. They guard treasures and fight knights, and sometimes they're good and sometimes they're bad, but they're always awesome." Vex Thull's head tilted slightly, a gesture that reminded Sarah uncomfortably of a bird of prey studying its next meal. "And you believe we resemble these dragons?" "Oh yeah," Tommy said enthusiastically. "You're like the coolest dragon ever. Way better than in any of my books." The silence that followed stretched for an eternity. Sarah could hear her own heartbeat thundering in her ears. She had no idea how the Zephyrian would interpret her son's words. In their culture, comparisons to mythological creatures could be seen as either a compliment or an insult, depending on the context. Finally, Vex Thull's scales shifted to a slightly lighter shade. "Interesting perspective, small one. Come. The High Command awaits." They continued through the ship, but Sarah noticed a change in their escort's demeanor. The rigid military bearing remained, but there was something else now, a subtle shift in posture that she couldn't quite identify. The council chamber was a vast cavern, carved from the same living rock as the corridors, but on a scale that took Sarah's breath away. The ceiling disappeared into shadow high above, while bioluminescent veins traced complex patterns across the walls. In the center of the chamber, arranged in a circle, were 7 massive stone seats. 6 of them were occupied. Sarah had seen images of Zephyrian High Command members, but nothing had prepared her for the reality. Each one was unique in coloration and scale pattern, but all shared the same predatory grace and obvious intelligence. They were ancient beings, she realized, their scales bearing the scars of countless battles, and their eyes holding the wisdom of centuries. The largest of them, sitting on what was clearly the seat of highest honor, rose as they approached. This had to be Supreme War Leader Crexmore, the absolute ruler of the Zephyrian Empire. Legend spoke of him personally leading fleets into battle, of conquering star systems with nothing but his tactical brilliance and overwhelming force. "So," Crexmore said, his voice echoing through the chamber like distant thunder, "these are the humans who dare to trespass in our domain." Sarah stepped forward, her diplomatic training taking over despite her terror. "Supreme War Leader, I am Ambassador Sarah Chen of Earth. I come seeking an audience to discuss the accidental incursion of our people into your territory." "Accidental," repeated another council member, her voice dripping with skepticism. "How convenient. Tell me, soft skin, what makes your species worthy of consideration? What strength do you possess that might interest the Empire?" This was it, the moment Sarah had been preparing for. She began her carefully rehearsed speech about human innovation, adaptability, and potential contributions to galactic society. But as she spoke, she could see the council members growing restless. Their scales were shifting to darker hues, their postures becoming more aggressive. "Technological advancement means nothing without the will to use it," Crexmore interrupted. "Your species builds tools but lacks the strength to wield them effectively. You speak of peace and cooperation, concepts that mark you as weak prey animals. With respect, Supreme War Leader," Sarah said, desperation creeping into her voice. "Humanity has survived and thrived for millennia. We have overcome countless challenges through determination and ingenuity. Survival without conquest is merely prolonged dying." Another council member growled. "You offer us nothing we cannot take for ourselves." Sarah felt her carefully constructed arguments crumbling. Everything she had prepared was falling on deaf ears. These beings respected only strength, and humanity's greatest strengths, creativity, compassion, cooperation, were seen as weaknesses by their standards. "Mommy, Tommy tugged at her sleeve. Why are they angry? The question cut through the tension like a blade. All eyes turned to the small boy who had been quietly observing the proceedings, with wide-eyed fascination. They're not angry, sweetheart, Sarah said softly. They're just deciding whether humans can be their friends. Tommy nodded solemnly, then stepped forward before Sarah could stop him. The council chamber fell silent as the 6-year-old walked toward the circle of ancient predators, his small shoes echoing in the vast space. Excuse me, he said politely, looking up at Supreme War Leader Crexmore. Are you the biggest dragon? The question was so unexpected, so innocently asked, that even the Supreme War Leader seemed taken aback. I am the leader of this council. Small one. Cool, Tommy said. You're really big. And your scales are pretty. They shine like my mom's jewelry. Crexmore leaned forward slightly, his massive head lowering to better observe this tiny human who showed no fear. You are not afraid, young one? Why would I be afraid? Tommy asked, tilting his head in confusion. Dragons are awesome. My dad tells me stories about knights fighting dragons, but I always root for the dragons because they're cooler. A ripple of what might have been amusement passed through the council. Sarah held her breath, not daring to move as her son continued his impromptu diplomacy. Can I ask you something? Tommy said to Crexmore. The Supreme War Leader's eyes narrowed with interest. Speak. Do you breathe fire? The question hung in the air for a moment before Crexmore's throat began to glow with an inner light. He opened his mouth slightly, and a small jet of superheated plasma emerged, dissipating harmlessly in the air above Tommy's head. Tommy's face lit up with pure joy. That's so cool. You really are a dragon. And then, before anyone could react, before Sarah could even process what was happening, Tommy stepped forward and stood on his tiptoes, with the fearless affection that only a child could show. He planted a gentle kiss on the tip of Crexmore's massive snout. The council chamber erupted into chaos. The silence that followed was absolute. Every Zephyrian in the council chamber had gone completely still, their scales frozen in whatever pattern they had been displaying when Tommy's lips touched Crexmore's snout. Even the ambient hum of the ship's systems seemed to have stopped. Sarah's heart hammered so hard she thought it might burst. Her diplomatic mind raced through every possible interpretation of what had just happened. And none of them ended well for humanity. In Zephyrian culture, touching a superior without permission was often grounds for immediate execution. Touching the Supreme War Leader? She couldn't even find a precedent for such an act. Tommy stepped back, completely oblivious to the magnitude of what he had done. He smiled up at Crexmore with the same innocent joy he had shown when petting the neighbor's dog back on Earth. Your scales feel warm, he said happily. Like a rock that's been sitting in the sun. Crexmore remained motionless for what felt like hours, but was probably only seconds. His massive eyes, each one larger than Tommy's head, focused on the small human, with an intensity that made Sarah want to grab her son and run. But there was nowhere to run to. Nowhere to hide from the consequences of this moment. Then, impossibly, the Supreme War Leader's scales began to shift. The deep crimson that had marked his agitation gave way to something Sarah had never seen in any of the cultural briefings. A soft golden hue that seemed to emanate from within his massive frame. You kissed me, Crexmore said, his voice barely above a whisper. Tommy nodded enthusiastically. My mom always gives me kisses when I'm sad or scared. You looked kind of sad, so I thought maybe you needed one too. The other council members exchanged glances that Sarah couldn't interpret. Their scales were displaying a rainbow of colors she had never seen before. Patterns that seemed to shift and flow like liquid light. In our culture, said Council Member Thexira, the female who had questioned humanity's worth, a kiss is not. It is not something that exists. Oh, Tommy said, his face scrunching up in concentration. Well, it's like a hug, but with your lips. You do it to show someone you care about them. Mom kisses me goodnight, and Dad kisses Mom when he comes home from work, and Grandma kisses everyone because she says life's too short not to care about them, repeated another council member. Zarkoth the Ancient. His scales were shifting through patterns Sarah had never seen. Complex geometries that seemed to tell a story all their own. This action demonstrates affection without regard for status or strength? Yeah, Tommy said simply. It just means you like someone. Crexmore's massive head lowered until he was at eye level with the small boy. And you. Like me? Even though I could incinerate you with a breath? Well, you didn't, Tommy pointed out, with 6-year-old logic. And you made pretty fire shapes in the air, instead of scary ones. That was nice of you. Sarah watched in amazement as something unprecedented happened in the Zephyrian Council chamber. The Supreme War Leader's expression, always harsh and predatory, softened. Not physically, his features remained the same, sharp angles and razor-edged scales, but something in his eyes changed. Nice, Crexmore repeated, as if tasting a foreign word. An action performed without expectation of gain or demonstration of power. Exactly, Tommy said, apparently delighted that the giant dragon was understanding. Like when I help Mrs. Patterson carry her groceries. Or when I share my cookies at lunch. Mom says, being nice is its own reward. The small one speaks of behaviors unknown to us. Council member Vorthal observed, his scales cycling through what Sarah was beginning to recognize as patterns of deep contemplation. Actions that provide no tactical advantage, no increase in status or resources. But they make people happy, Tommy explained earnestly. And when people are happy, they want to be around you more. It's like making friends instead of making enemies. The council fell silent again. But this time, it felt different. Where before, there had been hostility and barely contained aggression, now there was something else entirely. Curiosity, perhaps, or even wonder. Tell me more about these friends, Crexmore said, settling back into his stone seat, but keeping his attention fixed on Tommy. What followed was perhaps the most surreal diplomatic exchange in human history. Tommy, oblivious to the fact that he was single-handedly conducting first-contact negotiations with one of the galaxy's most powerful civilizations, began explaining the concept of friendship to beings who had never experienced it. He told them about his best friend Marcus at school and how they shared their lunch and helped each other with homework. He explained how friends looked out for each other, how they played games together where everyone could win, how they said sorry when they hurt someone's feelings and tried to make things better. But what if your friend is weaker than you? Asked Council Member Yex Torn. Do you not simply dominate them and take what you want? Tommy looked genuinely confused. Why would I want to hurt Marcus? He's my friend. That would be mean. Mean, Thexira said thoughtfully. Mom says mean people are usually just sad or scared inside, Tommy explained with the wisdom that sometimes comes from the mouths of children. And that if you're nice to them, sometimes they become nice too. Sarah watched in fascination as the most powerful beings in known space grappled with ideas that human children learned in kindergarten. The irony was not lost on her. Concepts that humanity took for granted were completely alien to these ancient predators. Your offspring displays no fear, Crexmore observed to Sarah. This is unusual. Most species tremble in our presence. Finding her voice at last, Sarah stepped forward carefully. Human children are naturally curious and trusting. Tommy sees you as, well, as dragons from his storybooks. Magnificent beings to be admired, not feared. Magnificent, Zarkoth, the ancient repeated. He sees us as objects of admiration rather than terror. Oh yeah, Tommy chimed in. You're all really cool. I bet you could fly between the stars and have amazing adventures. Do you have dragon friends on other planets? The question seemed to puzzle the council. We have allies, Vorthal said slowly. Species that serve the Empire out of necessity or fear. That doesn't sound like friends, Tommy said, frowning. Friends choose to be together because they like each other. They don't have to be scared. And if we chose to be friends with humanity? Crexmore asked, the word still awkward in his mouth. What would this friendship entail? Tommy's face lit up. Oh, we could do all sorts of cool stuff together. Humans are really good at building things and figuring out problems. And you guys are super strong and can fly spaceships and breathe fire. We could explore new planets together. And maybe the humans could help fix things if they broke. And the dragons could protect everyone from bad guys. Bad guys? Thexira inquired. People who want to hurt others or take their stuff, Tommy explained. But if we're all friends, we can stop the bad guys together. That's what teams do. Sarah watched in amazement as the concept of cooperation, genuine cooperation, not domination, slowly began to take root in the minds of these ancient beings. She could see the wheels turning behind their burning eyes, calculating the implications of what Tommy was describing. This child speaks of combining strengths without conquest, Zarkoth observed. Of mutual benefit, without subjugation. It is efficient, Vorthal admitted grudgingly. Resources saved from constant warfare could be redirected toward expansion and exploration. And the small ones would not flee or resist? Crexmore asked. They would choose to remain and contribute? That's what friends do, Tommy said simply. They help each other because they want to. Council member Yextorn leaned forward. You spoke of your father, young one. Is he a warrior? Dad's in the Space Navy, Tommy said proudly. He protects the colonies and makes sure the trade ships get through safely. He says his job is to keep people safe so they can live their lives and be happy. A protector, Crexmore mused. Not a conqueror. Well, he fights sometimes, Tommy admitted. But only when bad people try to hurt good people. Mom says, that's what heroes do. The word seemed to resonate through the chamber. Heroes. Another concept that had no direct translation in Zephyrian culture, where strength was its own justification and the mighty took what they pleased. Tell us about heroes, Thexira said, her scales now displaying patterns of intense curiosity. And so Tommy did. He told them about superheroes and firefighters and doctors and teachers. He explained how heroes were people who used their strength to help others, who stood up to bullies, who saved people in danger even when it was scary or hard. My mom's a hero too, he said, glancing back at Sarah with pure adoration. She studies aliens and learns about them so people can be friends instead of enemies. She's really smart and brave. Sarah felt her cheeks burn with embarrassment and pride. Her son's innocent faith in her was both humbling and terrifying, especially given their current circumstances. And you believe we could be heroes? Crexmore asked, the concept clearly fascinating him. You're already strong and powerful, Tommy said. You just need to decide to use it to help people instead of scare them. That's what makes someone a hero. Tommy. The council fell into another long silence, but Sarah could see that something fundamental had shifted. The predatory alertness was still there, but it was tempered by something new. She realized that for the first time in their lives, these ancient beings were considering the possibility that strength could be used for something other than domination. The small one has given us much to consider, Crexmore said finally. These concepts of friendship and heroism are intriguing. Crexmore, does that mean we can be friends? Tommy asked hopefully. Crexmore's massive head lowered again until he was eye level with the boy. Perhaps, young dragon friend. But such decisions require careful consideration. Okay, Tommy said agreeably. But while you're thinking, would you like another kiss? Mom says they help people feel better when they're worried about stuff. The offer hung in the air like a challenge and an invitation rolled into one. Sarah held her breath, knowing that her son's innocent gesture had somehow become the fulcrum upon which humanity's future balanced. Crexmore stared at the small boy for a long moment, then slowly lowered his massive head until his snout was within Tommy's reach. I would like that, he said quietly. Tommy stood on his tiptoes again and placed another gentle kiss on the Supreme War Leader's snout. This time, However, he wasn't the only one. As if some invisible signal had been given, every member of the council lowered their heads in a gesture that spoke of respect, curiosity, and the beginning of something entirely new. The age of conquest was ending. The age of friendship was about to begin. 6 months after the historic first contact, Ambassador Sarah Chen stood once again on the observation deck of a human vessel. But this time, she wasn't approaching the Zephyrian flagship as a desperate diplomat pleading for her species' survival. She was returning home as the architect of the most successful first contact in galactic history. The space around Earth was no longer empty. Zephyrian vessels moved in formation with human ships, their obsidian hulls gleaming alongside the chrome and ceramic of Earth's fleet. It was a sight that still took Sarah's breath away, even after months of gradual integration. "Mom, look." Tommy pressed his face against the viewport, pointing excitedly at the largest of the Zephyrian ships. "That's Krex's ship. Can we visit him when we get home?" Sarah smiled at her son's casual use of the Supreme War Leader's name. Somewhere along the way, the most feared being in the galaxy had become simply Krex to a 6-year-old boy from Earth. It was a transformation that perfectly encapsulated everything that had changed. "I'm sure we can arrange something," Sarah said. "Though remember, he's very busy these days." That was an understatement. In the months following their initial meeting, Krexmore had undergone what could only be described as a complete philosophical revolution. The concepts Tommy had introduced, friendship, cooperation, heroism, had taken root in the ancient leader's mind and grown into something unprecedented in Zephyrian history. The transformation hadn't been immediate or easy. Millennia of conquest-based culture didn't change overnight. But Krexmore had approached these new ideas with the same tactical brilliance that had made him the supreme leader of his people. He had studied human behavior, analyzed the benefits of cooperation over conquest, and gradually convinced his council that friendship was not weakness, but strength multiplied. "Ambassador Chen to the bridge," came the announcement over the ship's intercom. "We're receiving a transmission from Earth Command." Sarah made her way to the communications center, Tommy skipping alongside her. The holographic display showed Admiral Harrison, the head of Earth's First Contact Division, looking simultaneously exhausted and exhilarated. "Sarah," the Admiral said, without preamble, "the integration reports are beyond anything we hoped for. The joint research stations are producing results that would have taken us centuries to achieve alone. The Zephyrians' biotechnology combined with our quantum computing has opened doors we didn't even know existed." It was true. The partnership between humanity and the Zephyrian Empire had proven to be extraordinarily fruitful. Zephyrian bioengineering could create living machines that grew and adapted, while human creativity found applications that even the ancient aliens hadn't imagined. Together, they were solving problems that had plagued both species for generations. "What's the status on the Outer Rim situation?" Sarah asked. The Admiral's expression grew serious. "That's actually why I'm calling. We've received a distress signal from the Kepler system. A species called the Vrex are under attack by something the Zephyrians call Void Reapers. Krexmore has asked specifically for human assistance." Sarah felt a familiar chill. Even after months of friendship, the idea of humanity being asked to join the Zephyrians in battle was daunting. But she understood why Krexmore had made the request. In their time working together, he had come to appreciate human strategic thinking and technological innovation. "Are we talking about a rescue mission?" Sarah asked. "More than that," the Admiral replied. "This would be the first joint military operation between our species. A chance to prove that our alliance is more than just research partnerships and cultural exchanges." Tommy tugged at Sarah's sleeve. "Mom, what's wrong? You look worried." Sarah knelt down to her son's level. "Some people far away are in trouble, and Krex wants us to help them." "That's what friends do," Tommy said matter-of-factly. Out of the mouths of babes, Sarah thought. Her son's simple declaration cut through all the complex political and military considerations. In the end, it really was that simple. Friends helped friends, and friends of friends. 3 days later, Sarah found herself aboard the Zephyrian flagship once again. But the circumstances were vastly different from her first visit. She was no longer a supplicant but a trusted advisor. Tommy was with her, having become something of a mascot for the joint fleet. The Bridge of the Times, Scales of Vengeance Times had been modified to accommodate human crew members. Hybrid workstations combined Zephyrian bio-interfaces with human control systems, allowing both species to work seamlessly together. It was a perfect metaphor for what their alliance had become. "Status report," Crexmore commanded, as Sarah approached his command throne. "Human fleet reports ready." "Supreme War Leader," replied Commander Morrison, Sarah's former ship captain who now served as the human liaison officer. "All systems integrated and synchronized." Crexmore nodded, then looked down at Tommy. "And how does our youngest advisor assess the situation?" Tommy had become an unexpected fixture in strategic planning sessions. His questions, innocent though they were, often highlighted assumptions that the adults had overlooked. More than once, his simple observations had led to breakthrough insights. "Well," Tommy said seriously, studying the tactical display with the concentration of a seasoned general, "the bad guys are really strong, but they're also mean to everybody. That means lots of people want to stop them, right?" "An astute observation," said Councilmember Thexira, who had become something of a surrogate aunt to Tommy. "The Void Reapers have indeed made many enemies through their aggressive expansion. So maybe instead of just fighting them, we could get all their enemies to fight them together," Tommy suggested. "Mom says teamwork makes everything easier." The bridge fell silent as the adults processed this suggestion. It was classic Tommy, cutting through complex military doctrine to identify the core strategic opportunity. "A coalition of all species threatened by the Reapers," Crexmore mused. "It has merit. What are your thoughts, Ambassador?" Sarah smiled. "I think our youngest strategist might be onto something. If we can coordinate with the other species in the region, we could surround the Reapers completely." What followed was a flurry of diplomatic activity unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. For the first time in galactic history, the Zephyrian Empire reached out to other species, not as conquerors, but as allies. The transformation was so dramatic that many civilizations initially thought it was a trap. It fell to Tommy, in many cases, to serve as the perfect ambassador. His innocent enthusiasm for making friends and stopping the bad guys translated across species barriers in ways that traditional diplomacy couldn't match. A child's sincere desire to help was a universal language that even the most skeptical aliens could understand. The Battle of Kepler, 7, as it came to be known in galactic history, lasted only 3 hours. The Void Reapers, accustomed to facing isolated worlds and scattered fleets, found themselves surrounded by a coalition of 17 species, working in perfect harmony. Human tactical coordination, Zephyrian biotechnology, and the unique capabilities of a dozen other civilizations created a force that was unstoppable. But the real victory came afterward. When the rescued Vrex delegation approached the Allied fleet, their leader, a crystalline being named Shardeth, spoke directly to the young human boy who had somehow become the informal diplomat of the coalition. "Young one," Shardeth said, its voice chiming like distant bells, "you have given us hope. For the first time in centuries, we see that cooperation is possible. That friendship can exist between the stars." Tommy smiled up at the alien, completely unaware that he was making history. "Want to be friends with all of us? We're starting a really cool club for people who want to help each other." And so the Galactic Friendship Alliance was born. Not in the chambers of diplomats or the strategic rooms of military commanders, but in the innocent invitation of a child who believed that everyone could be friends if they just tried hard enough. Sarah watched her son shake hands, or the equivalent appendage with representatives from 17 different species, each one charmed by his simple sincerity. She thought about the journey that had brought them here. From that terrifying first meeting to this moment of unprecedented unity. Your offspring has achieved something remarkable, Crexmore said quietly, joining her at the observation window. He has given the galaxy something it never knew it needed. What's that? Sarah asked. Hope. The Supreme War Leader replied. The hope that strength and kindness need not be opposites. That power can be used to build, rather than destroy. 6 months later, the transformation was complete. The Zephyrian Empire had evolved into the Zephyrian Alliance, the first member of what was now being called the Friendship Coalition. 17 species worked together on everything from scientific research to mutual defense, sharing knowledge and resources in ways that benefited everyone. Tommy, now 7 years old, had his own office in the Alliance headquarters. Officially, he was listed as Special Advisor for Interspecies Relations. Unofficially, he was the heart and soul of an alliance that spanned the galaxy. You know what I think? He said to his mother one evening, as they watched the sunset over New Geneva, the Alliance's joint capital city. Zephyrian younglings played in the parks alongside human children, while adults of both species worked together to build a better future. What's that, sweetheart? Sarah asked. I think the galaxy was just lonely, Tommy said with the wisdom that sometimes comes from the mouths of children. All these different people living far apart and being scared of each other, but now we're all friends, and nobody has to be lonely anymore. Sarah hugged her son close, marveling at how a simple kiss on a dragon's snout had changed everything. The galaxy was indeed a friendlier place, and it all started with a little boy who believed that everyone deserved kindness. In the distance, a Zephyrian transport ship was landing, its bioluminescent hull pulsing in patterns that had once meant threat and conquest, but now spelled welcome and peace. The age of fear was over. The age of friendship had begun, and it all started with a kiss.